A new Pokemon game is on the way, and I'm very excited, but also very weary. The last few Pokemon games have been rather tame and lost some of the charms that the original games had. This got me thinking, what makes a good Pokemon game? So far we've had 7 generations of Pokemon, and each one has its fans and haters, and I'm going to examine what the best Pokemon generation is, based on my personal preferences. So sit down, bust out your Game Boys, because here's my review of all the Pokemon generations. In these mini reviews, I'll be talking about the regions, the overall feel of the games, and of course, the Pokemon. And remember, this is my opinion, so if you have a different opinion, please tell me in the comments below. Don't take my opinion as fact. I'm just some loser. Pokemon Red and Blue, Green, if you live in Japan, came out September 28th, 1996, and its director's cut, Yellow, came out 2 years later. It's the games that started it all. Have they aged well? Listen, Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow were pretty good for the time, and for the most part are still pretty okay today. And newcomers will definitely like it. But after playing the other Pokemon games, I'm sorry to say, but these games are about as appealing as a half-eaten sandwich. Or Jinx. Pokemon references. Anyways, these games are really broken. The Psychic-type Pokemon have no weaknesses, making them way too overpowered. The special attack and special defense stat are combined into one, making some Pokemon, like Alakazam, just these overpowered, unbeatable gods. Hyper Beam, which was this ungodly, super powerful move, had to be recharged after every turn. Seems fair, right? Well, it is. But the problem is, if you KO'd a Pokemon, you could use it again and again and again and again. And that was not fun. There's a bunch of glitches, most notably missing now. The region of Kanto feels pretty bland with only a few notable locations, and the graphics haven't held up particularly well, but that's to be expected. So with all that being said, you may think I hate Gen 1, but actually, I don't. Gen 1 may be flawed, but it's still good. The gameplay of catching Pokemon, trading them, battling them, and going through the region to become the very best are still here. And it's great, it's just not very polished. I love the main themes of the Gen 1 games, which are basically what happens when messing with genetics goes too far. And the Pokemon in this generation reflect this. Mewtwo is an almost perfect clone of Mew, Blastoise is a turtle that had cannons lodged into its shell, and Parasect is a zombified monstrosity. Gen 1 introduced a lot of great Pokemon. All 3 starters are great, and Pikachu is a pop culture icon. However, my favorite Pokemon in this generation is Gengar, a terrifying ghost that's actually really good in battles. Gen 1 also has a great rival. This guy is an asshole and is always one step ahead of you at times. So, the game gives you incentive to kick this guy halfway across Kanto. Overall, while I think this game is flawed, I still do have a soft spot for it. I'll give Generation 1 a B.
After the success of Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow, Game Freak went to work on the next generation of Pokemon, and on November 17th, 1999, Pokemon Gold and Silver were released with the director's cut known as Crystal releasing a year later, and they were an improvement in every sense of the word. Now, before I get to why these games are godly, I have 2 minor problems with it. First off, the region of Johto has some cool myths, and overall it's better than Kanto. It's so small that in these games they actually had to add in Kanto to compensate for Johto's size.
Do you think maybe he's compensating for something?
My second problem is only 100 new Pokemon were added, so most of the Pokemon in the game were carryovers from Gen 1, and a lot of the Pokemon are fairly forgettable. Like, I've never in my life seen someone say Quillfish or Stantler are their favorite Pokemon. Also, this generation introduced baby Pokemon. I can't stand most of these things. With a few exceptions, these things are just useless. These guys take 9 months in a fucking childbirth to evolve, and they're not strong, like, at all. I want to know who the genius was who decided to give Jinx a friggin' pre-evolution. Ah, man, I'm getting winded. I hate baby Pokemon. I hate baby Pokemon. Okay? Aside from that, I do love Generation 2. The main theme of this generation is myths and legends, primarily Japanese-inspired myths. Inspired? Did I say inspired? I meant to say inspired. Fuck. Anyways, primarily Japanese-inspired myths. I do like this theme as it clashes with the first generation's mad science theme. The psychic type has been fixed as it now has a weakness to an all-new type, the dark type. Sadly, dark types can only be found near the end of the game, and that reminds me, there are now 2 new types, Steel and the previously mentioned Dark. And these Pokemon types are a great addition as now the game feels more balanced. Also, the special stat, for the first time ever, has been split into 2 types of stats, which are Special Attack and Special Defense, which makes everything so much better in the long run. There's a day and night cycle, which is dope, rare shiny Pokemon, the ability to play as a female character, and so much more. The Pokemon introduced here are mostly pretty good. There may not be a whole lot, but the great ones are really great. I love the legendaries, the starters are pretty good except for Chikorita, but what's my favorite in this generation? Wooper. I'm not kidding. I fucking love Wooper. Overall, I do love Generation 2. I'll give it an A-. The development of Generation 3 was a hassle. The ability to transfer Pokemon from a previous generation had to be cut along with the day and night cycle. This was because the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance were so different in terms of hardware. The hype for Pokemon was also slowing down around this time. Director Junichi Masuda was also very stressed out, having constant nightmares, and even having to get his stomach checked. But surely enough, on November 21st, 2002, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire were released to critical and commercial success, along with a director's cut 2 years later. And in my opinion, this is some of the greatest stuff Pokemon has ever done. You gotta understand here, this was the first Pokemon generation I ever played, so I do have a little bit of bias here. But first, let's get my one negative out of the way. Fuck the Torchic line. Why does it get more attention than the Mudkip line? Mudkip is cooler! Okay, cool. We're done. Generation 3 was dope. For the first time in a Pokemon game, we got a world that was almost completely open. Double battles spiced things up by adding a whole new level of planning. And also, there was abilities and the music. Oh, it's so glorious! Hoenn is diverse and fun to explore. The themes of nature and why we shouldn't tamper with it are great. Pokemon contests were added. The Battle Frontier was introduced. Remakes of the first Pokemon game came out, and even after the Let's Go games came out on the Switch, these games are still the definitive way to play the first generation of Pokemon. But you know what the best part of this generation was? You want to know? They added the best Pokemon ever created. And who is that Pokemon? It's fucking Mudkip, ladies and gentlemen! Oh, I am convinced that if there is a god, it is him. It is him. It is Mudkip. He is a god, and he should be added in Smash as the next DLC. So yeah, what does this generation get for a grade? Well, no shit, it's gonna get an A+. While Generation 3 may be my favorite Pokemon generation, Generation 4 has my favorite Pokemon games of all time in it. On September 28th, 2006, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl were released, and a Platinum version came out 2 years later. Generation 4 was a critical and commercial success, and for good reason. Pokemon hadn't looked or played better. Okay, the games could have been faster, and wild encounter rates were far too common even for Pokemon, but that's my negatives. The return of the real-time Days of the Week system from Generation 2 with enhanced transitions between the time periods of the day was a huge advancement. Not only that, Pokemon are now able to be traded and battled over the internet through the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection, although that's now been shut down. And now the games have a 3D looking overworld. Honestly, I don't have much to say about Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. They took everything from Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald and just kind of made it better. Except for the speed. Sinnoh's a pretty good region. It's fairly varied. The themes of time and space are neat, and the Pokemon are nice, with my favorite being Infernape. But I'm not here to talk about Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. I'm here to talk about the real best games here. The remakes of Gold and Silver, Heart Gold and Soul Silver. In my humble opinion, this is Pokemon at its peak. The amount of content here is insane. You can even get a Mudkip. So, just like the generation preceding it, Generation 4 also gets an A+. Generation 3 was a masterpiece, and Generation 4 wasn't far behind. So what's next? Well, people were complaining that Pokemon wasn't feeling fresh enough, so for the first time ever, Pokemon had a reboot. Not a soft reboot, like Generation 3, but a full-on reboot. Well, kind of. It's in the middle of a regular reboot and a soft reboot, and yeah, it's weird. But anyways, Pokemon Black and White was released on September 18th, 2010, with a sequel coming out 2 years later. This one's weird. On one hand, I really liked the sequel, but on the other, I wasn't a huge fan of the game preceding it. On one hand, I loved some of the new Pokemon designs, and on the other, I feel a lot aren't very good, or they just rehash stuff from Kanto. My point is, while I do really like Generation 5, there are some areas where it falls a little flat. One area it doesn't fall flat in is the region. For the first time ever, we have a region that's not based around an area in Japan. It's based on New York, which is one of my favorite cities. These are easily the best looking Pokemon games in my opinion. Even with the jump to 3D, I still feel like this is better. There's 156 new Pokemon, and no evolutionary relatives of previous Pokemon. And in the original Black and White, no Pokemon from previous generations can be caught in Unova itself until after the National Pokédex is obtained. I like the theme of relationship between opposites and the greater emphasis on story, but my main problem is oftentimes I don't really care. What I do care about is content, and Black and White, and more importantly, its sequel, have a lot of content. What I loved most is in the sequel you could battle gym leaders from all the old games, and it's also the most challenging Pokemon games in my eyes. The Pokestar Studios is also dope. My favorite Pokemon this generation was Duat. I don't know, I just think he was cool. Anyways, I'd probably give Generation 5 an A. So Generation 4 and 5 gave fans glimpses at what a 3D Pokemon could be, but everything was still controlled on a 2D axis. And so for the next Pokemon generation, Game Freak brought the series to the Z-axis for the first time, and honestly, I did not like this generation that much. I didn't really care for the characters, I wasn't a huge fan of the Pokemon here, the graphics were nice, but my problem here was the colors looked too washed out, and I'm being honest, I would have preferred them using sprites like the previous generation. The games were way too easy. I can't stand the rivals here. They're about as threatening as a kitten, and they have the personality of a sawdust. I hear in the anime they made Serena into more of a likable character, but I don't really watch the anime, so I can't really comment on that. My problem is this game feels too basic, and its theme sucks. We went from the balance of good and evil to fashion, I guess? X and Y aren't very good. I like the addition of the Mega Evolutions, and Super Training is convenient, but that's really it. If I had a favorite Pokemon here, and this is incredibly basic, but it'd be Greninja. And if we're counting Mega Evolutions, I think Mega Swampert is pretty cool. I mean, how they turned Swampert into even more of a Chad. Take that, Blaziken. The other games that came out in this generation were remakes of Ruby and Sapphire. While these games came out, people went nuts. People started appreciating Generation 3 a lot more. These remakes, while they were masterpieces, and I think the originals are better, they were alright, and they made Swampert to even more of a Chad. So all in all, Generation 6 isn't awful, but it doesn't reach the highs of the previous 4 generations. Or, hell, even 5. Basically, this generation of Pokemon is to Game Freak as Cars 1 is to Pixar. Something that's okay, but not as good as everything else in their catalog. I'll give this generation a C+. Generation 6 was a bit of a disappointment. Generation 7 is like if Generation 6 had more heart. Pokemon Sun and Moon were released on November 18th, 2016, with a sequel coming a year later. If we were to compare this region to the last one, I prefer this one by just a smidge. I like the Alola region, it's nice, bright, and has a lot of personality. The Pokemon here are pretty cool, including the new Alola forms. The rival is still pretty bad, but the evil team is amazing. They're a bunch of low-class thugs, and their leader has a theme that bops. Their evil plans include stealing a bus stop and vandalizing stuff. They're honestly not threatening at all, but their personality makes more than makes up for it. And if I'm being honest, their leader gave me a pretty difficult time. Out of all the Pokemon in this generation, my favorite was Rowlet. Sun and Moon may have been the main focus of this generation, but it's not what people remember this generation for. Now, up until now, I haven't mentioned spin-offs, as they've been mostly pretty irrelevant, but this spin-off had everyone getting together. I'm, of course, talking about Pokemon Go, the game that was unfinished as hell, but it was at the same time amazing. It got people exercising, people made new friends, and it got so many people into the series. I was even interviewed about this game in 2016, me and my pizza face. Link to the description to that video. Overall, Generation 7 was pretty alright. I'll give it a B. So, that was the Pokemon games. What have we learned? Mudkip is God. Thanks for watching!